Welcome to the University of Nottingham podcast.
This week, the race for the White House. Professor Richard King from the School of American and Canadian Studies looks at the presidential race, focusing on the financial crisis.
If there's any one thing that can be seen as a break for Obama in a clear sense, and a single thing, that would have to be it, the economic crisis.
The issue of race.
Everybody knows why they're doing it. It's one of the racial, cultural dimensions that's there.
And the legacy of George W. Bush.
This is the worst, last 8 years is the worst I've experienced an American living abroad for sheer, down to gut level anti-Americanism. It's just incredible.
Time's really catching up with them now, and we'll get to some strange developments and some heated developments in a second. But in principle, looking at the two camps, what have you made of the campaign so far?
Well, one of the comments that I've read that the quirkiness is it's an election in which both sides are convinced they're going to lose, aside from the public rhetoric. But both sides are afraid in the campaign and seem to be more playing defensive at times rather than offensive. So that's one thing. I thought, to be honest, it was going to be a better presidential campaign than it has been. I think that the Democratic primary campaigns were better as far as airing issues, and in some cases, the issues that have come up in the presidential campaign since last June when Hillary bowed out. Some of the issues come up are repeats from the Democratic primary, as with the controversy over Obama's connections with William Ayers, the former weatherman radical in the 1960s. So I think we're literally seeing reruns. The second thing is, I think that Obama warned about what happens in presidential elections, and that is a big event gets turned into a small thing. And that has happened, and in particular, over the last week or so, the assaults on, or at least questioning of Obama's character by the McCain campaign. No side's blemish-free on any of this, but I think that has been the tendency. But what that's meant is that certain kinds of issues seem too boring or insoluble, but you can always fall back on character, personality, those kinds of issues, and cultural issues. Interesting that abortion hasn't played a major role. Those sort of value issues haven't played as much as they might have been. The campaign has been disappointing in terms of a calm, interesting airing of issues.
It has been rather strange in that, if you take the traditional issues that you'd normally associate with the Republican campaign, say immigration, for example, McCain is actually quite moderate.
That's right.
On those issues.
Co-sponsored a bill, or at one point with a Democrat, and he's backed off that. Yes, those kinds of issues where it would seem like it would be almost his advantage to raise them, he hasn't done so. Now, part of the problem is he's got a base problem. That is, the Republican base, the core Republican vote. Base is the American politics term for that. And the core Republican vote is more conservative than he is on many issues, particularly cultural and value issues. Although he's come out very strongly against abortion, very conservative in his indication of the type of justice he'll appoint to the Supreme Court. So he's made attempts to placate his core constituency. The nomination of Sarah Palin was clearly an attempt to consolidate and energize that base.
So it certainly seemed to bring in again that evangelical, the religious right again.
That's right.
Seemed to draw them back into the camp.
That said, I think the explicitly religious rhetoric has been surprisingly muted as opposed to just general patriotism. Sarah Palin, as far as I can tell, is not identified very strongly with the religious right, although there's some hints of membership and connections. So people look back and say, not that the religious right or the evangelical movement in politics is gone, but that this election hasn't seen it energized or brought out, flushed out, if you will, in a way that we might have thought.
That seemed to have been the problem for Kerry in the previous election.
It seems
as soon as they hit that sort of the Midwest. It was
Midwest and South, and Kerry's connection with Europe, as in speaking French. And, of course, Obama goes off the charts as far as diverse background from Africa. But in a strange way, that doesn't feed into the sophistication, elitist syndrome that gets raised. Obama also nipped it or blunted it early by making clear his own religious views and stressing them on occasion. And that's what all that family politics was about. And Michelle Obama speaking at the Democratic Convention, that it was about allaying the value issues, allaying the fears of Americans about that. And family can substitute or be a kind of metaphor for all sorts of things. There are all sorts of ways to skin a cat. I think his campaign's been pretty skillful about blunting those.
Economy is obviously, there's no avoiding it. It's been put forward as a possible reason why this campaign has seemed a little muted, a little strained. Looking at the two positions, McCain seems to be in a no-win situation, really. He's talking about energy independence. The one sort of concrete solution he's come up with is the Treasury buying up the bad debt, buying up the bad mortgages and reselling them at reduced values back to the people in those houses who accrued the debts in the first place. Not an especially popular view. Barack Obama, I suppose, has to some extent the luxury of being able to sit back and say, well, I'd regulate it more if I was in that position. McCain is quite a different political animal to George Bush. We do know that. But can he escape the legacy of George Bush if he were to win the elections? How does he fix this? Because part of the economic problem is seen very much George Bush's problem.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about the way that the economic issue and the economic crisis, moving from issue to crisis, has muted some of the debate. By, as you say, putting McCain in a double bind, no-win situation where he loses whichever way he jumps. He loses his base if he goes too regulatory or statist and sounds like a liberal Democrat or a socialist, as less informed views would have it. On the other hand, if he sticks with the old sort of conventional small state, the rhetoric of small state republicanism and free market, then even almost anybody can see that that's more of the same rather than a solution that seems fresh. So he's caught being saddled with the Bush legacy there. And I think that has hurt him. And if there's any one thing that can be seen as a break for Obama in a clear sense, any single thing, that would have to be it, the economic crisis. It's almost a rerun of 1932 when Republican President Hoover is in the White House and runs against Franklin Roosevelt. Neither candidates, by the time the campaign was going, were very specific about what they were going to do. And Roosevelt, it was in some ways incumbent upon him to say what he would do with more specificity because he was the challenger as a Democrat. And he was very vague, and Obama's been pretty vague about it all. As you say, it's part of the Democratic liberal ideology to look to the state for certain sorts of interventions and impact on the market. And all Obama's got to do is to plug in what he already believes. And he knows the rhetoric. He knows how to talk that talk. He has the definite advantage there. Now, when it comes to specific solutions to the financial crisis as opposed to the economy in general or the economic impact of that, there's not a lot of difference between them because everybody's feeling their way along. Maybe Gordon Brown's going to be the man to present the general model for, if not nationalization of banks, recapitalizing them and providing liquidity. All those terms we've learned what they mean in the last in the last 2 weeks. I think it's fair to say that Obama has more intellectual firepower, more experienced economic advisors from the Clinton administration, which after all had 8 years of very successful managing of the economy, although they also got rid of some of the regulatory mechanisms and structures, so they aren't blameless in this either, but they are Democrats that have experience. As probably everyone knows, but it bears underlining, the Democrats can think on domestic politics and economics and society. That's where their expertise comes. That's where the academics and intellectuals have their strengths who side with the Democrats, roughly moderate to liberal. Republicans claim that foreign policy and defense, their specialties, and I've noticed in both debates the reactions have generally been, and I saw most, particularly the first one, that when McCain begins talking about foreign policy, whatever specific things he seems much more comfortable. So Obama is working with a cadre of advisors, and he's gotten a lot of support there, and getting a spectrum of advice, I suppose you'd say. He's also got a heavy battery of foreign policy people too, but that's an area where I think he feels he needs it more, and the selection of his vice presidential running mate, Joe Biden, indicates, because Biden's a foreign policy specialist, a ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and so I think his vice presidential choice was both conventional but also wise. It was a case where conventional wisdom, I think, was the wisdom.
Yeah, well, Joe Biden's 65, isn't he?
Yeah.
And Sarah Palin's 44.
That's right. They sort of invert the Republican lineup, where the president is the older man to a younger vice presidential. And
John McCain's now got into a perceived, it could be a media exaggeration, but a sort of, he's clashed with John Lewis.
Yeah.
Over supposed
Lewis's comments,
encouragements to target Obama personally, and as John Lewis sees it on racially. How much more damage do you think the Republicans can withstand? Because at the moment, the polls out today, Gallup have Obama at 51%, McCain at 43%, the Washington Post, again 51-45, and Ipsos 46-42. So it's not by any means a landslide lead at the moment, but certainly the momentum seems to be with the Democrats.
Obama has taken the best or worst hit he can on character issue. That is, they've targeted explicitly, but that he's taken that and still has a lead for one thing. That don't seem to be signs that it's started any sort of ball rolling. It does bring up the issue that you would think that any other candidate of his intelligence, abilities, capacity to speak, demeanor, that he would be 12 to 15 points ahead, and it raises the race issue. There may be a glass ceiling that's there somewhere that's keeping him from kicking beyond a certain margin, 8, 9, occasionally 10 points. In some ways, the better he does and the more confused McCain's campaign can seem and more he has to shift gears, the more it raises the race issue of why Obama's not farther ahead. We've read about the issue of the Bradley effect of a black candidate, it's claimed, needs to be ahead circa 5 percentage points in order to have a good shot at winning an election. That's been contravened in another election. Virginia Governor Doug Wilder was ahead and in the polls and also won, whereas Tom Bradley, mayor of Los Angeles, a black candidate as well, lost. But so there's counter evidence there. But Wilder did lose between what people said to pollsters and how they voted once they got in. So we don't know what sort of lead Obama needs, often talked about in terms of 6-7% at least, to go in with it, to be favored. So he's right at the cusp right now. Raw polling data about McCain's up 47 to Obama's 43, Obama's up 51 to McCain's 42, has to be translated into and through that complicated electoral college process where in 48 of the 50 states, the winner of the popular vote, or the one who gets the plurality, the most of any of the candidates, but let's say winner of the popular vote, gets all the electoral votes from that state, which is equal to the sum of the 2 senators, every state has 2 senators, plus the number of representatives in the House they have. And that's determined by population. So you can win a state by 37 votes out of 10 million and get all the electoral votes, California, say. So popular, big percentage of 51 to 49 has to be translated into electoral college votes. And that can be quite different. In the election of 2000, Florida was important because Gore won the popular vote by around 500,000, but lost the electoral college vote. So take all the figures, try to remember where you are when you hear them. And Americans get mixed up on this too, so it's not a simple thing that only, it's not so complicated that only foreigners get mixed up on. Everybody does. But the popular vote is not the determining one.
I don't even want to consider Florida again. But,
right.
In terms of the swing states, they're heading towards the final push now. Which states for you are undecided but potentially highly influential?
Yeah. Well, I think the big three of problematic states for both candidates are Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I would have said Michigan up to about a week ago, but McCain pulled his campaign out of Michigan. Just significant moral and morale victory for the Obama camp, because that's something when somebody closes down their campaign in a major state. It's cutting your losses. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida are all borderline states where very much contested. And as you say, we know the history of Florida and this whole business from 2000 on. All of the states, though, seem to show Obama having gained leads over the last couple of weeks or so. My sense is, from memory and general reading, is Pennsylvania maybe the surest bet. Ohio and Florida really touch and go. Interesting articles are appearing about one of the quirks of American politics, about particularly Jewish college students and young people headed for Florida to talk to their parents and grandparents. South Florida, two large minorities there, Cuban Americans and Jewish Americans who've moved down from the New York, New Jersey area, Long Island, retired there. Classic Democratic voter Democrat all their life, their parents have, but they're afraid of Obama because of this thing. Is he a Muslim? These are old, people 75, 80, 85. They're worried about things like worried about Israel, just worried in general about the uncertainty. It's not like the other Democratic candidates they've met.
Well, it's like the recent convention, one of the addresses, I forget where it was, when McCain was speaking, taking questions, and one woman got up and said she was concerned because Obama is an Arab.
It's one of the most discouraging aspects of the campaign, and you hope the number of people that push this line, I don't think they're doing it cynically, they just keep thinking, are simply not informing themselves, and it's a kind of constant number. I've read something once earlier in the autumn where it said that the number had grown slightly, which is really discouraging. It seems to me like it's the counterpart in this election to race baiting or anti-Semitic charges in other elections, even in other countries in Europe in the late 19th, early 20th century, because you didn't want to be tainted with the association with Jews or with African Americans. And I think it's an issue that's going to have to be addressed. I think Obama should have said way back that no, he wasn't Muslim. If he were, it shouldn't matter. Just thrown that down as a marker and then left it. So at least he doesn't find himself, oh no, I'm not one of them, but it wouldn't matter if I were. You still should evaluate. But it is one of the distressing side issues, I think. And the Republicans introducing McCain and Palin in their public speeches, campaigning speeches last week, would call Obama by all three names: Barack Hussein Obama. Hussein is his middle name. He doesn't go by all three names. Everybody knows why they're doing it. It's one of the racial, cultural dimensions that's there.
This potentially, obviously, could be an historic presidential election in America's history. How does it rank with previous elections?
On substantive issues, I think with the economic crisis, it's very important, but as we were talking earlier, the candidates haven't staked out such widely divergent positions that you can say, it was significant because one position won out so clearly over the other. I think even the Bush administration is pushing interventionist and statist policies, and so should the Democrats win, it wouldn't be such a kind of thunderclap on those grounds. I think the large issue is symbolic in two senses. Internally in America, and that is electing an African-American president is enormously important. I think, and there's a lot to say there, but I think the other area is the area of America's image in the world as translated also into foreign policy, where this is the worst, last 8 years is the worst I've experienced an American living abroad for sheer, down to gut level anti-Americanism. It's just incredible and largely justified on policies and things. So what this will do to help, I think, it's not a panacea because Obama's policies have got to change some of the things too, but this has got to help immensely, and even in the Arab world.
Not really in America's history has there been a president like George Bush.
No.
And nor have there been the reactions to him that have been as vociferous as they have. How much of a change will it make? Just purely Bush no longer being in power at the administration?
Yeah, I think the whole perception of the person who is in that office will change, and I think Republicans who supported Bush must have come to cringe whenever he appeared and opened his mouth. You can almost feel sorry for Bush, because I've seen him in interviews and talks before he became president where he sounded pretty articulate and had a folksy manner, but a lot of Southern, Midwestern, Southwestern politicians do and are smart, as smart as anybody involved in politics. So that accent, you shouldn't go on that to determine intelligence. But his general way of handling himself has been so, I don't know, inept, I guess is the only word I can think about. But it has to be backed by policies that are misguided. And I think also the perception has hurt him and his reputation that he isn't in charge. It's Dick Cheney and other more senior, experienced people. So now Obama's coming to office, a man who's not widely experienced in executive positions either. I've read accounts of recent meetings he's had with economists where, and partly it was written, not exactly partisan, but people not hostile to him, but that he was impressive in the way he ran meetings and things of that sort. So he's a very capable man. And I think there may be a time for, as several people said, why can't we have our leaders be as smart or smarter than we are rather than the reverse? It's a strange sort of, it's been bad for democracy, I think, in the last 8 years.
I think that was Tim Robbins.
I saw him on. I was talking with a friend, a while ago, and did you see Tim Robbins on?
Why can't we have somebody intelligent?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what sort of President Obama makes if he wins the election, and there'll for sure be mistakes. But I think the way the government runs, I think one thing that people have forgotten, and this is kind of back to nitty-gritty stuff, the next president is going to appoint 2 to 4 members of the Supreme Court new. There are 9 members, 2, 3, or 4 are getting ready to, or should be getting ready to retire. Most of them are members of the moderate liberal bloc. But McCain's just said he's going to appoint conservatives, strict interpretationists, anti-abortion. And Obama, who's a constitutional lawyer and knows that world, most certainly won't. Most presidents are going to, moderate to liberal, will appoint not extremes at either end, but sort of centrist to liberal candidate. But that's really important because the Roe versus Wade decision in the early 70s allowing first trimester abortion has been chipped away at, and there have been several 5-4 decisions upholding it. But one person leaves the court, it'll go to a clear conservative majority. So it's very important for certain segments of American society that Obama has that power of appointment. So things like that, various smaller programs, the tone and tenor. I remember reading accounts of when Obama won one of the early primaries. Maybe it was Iowa. Maybe he had established his lead in the early part of the year. And there were, stories by black teachers about kids in school, talking about it and voting for the first time or getting involved and having a different attitude about things, So it can't last forever. The honeymoons don't last, but it's going to have some effects, both in general as switching administrations, dominant policies and orientations, also that particular man and that particular what he stands for.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of the University of Nottingham podcast. Some of the music in this show has been provided by the Podshow Podsafe Music Network. That's music.podshow.com. If you have any comments on this or any other podcast you've heard, you can contact me on andrew.burden@nottingham.ac.uk.